I need 50% to pass. And I agree that if I just do WP so I can like legitimately pass the ratio. So I can do research. Because you can't do research without a 3 Yeah, but like
Is this correct?
Okay, nobody's out. Paper out. Shoot, thought up the way. Because there, we go on uncomfortable. I think it's, honestly, I think it's uncomfortable to pick it up, but you go for it. And, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 1, oh, on that note. Okay, following people. Listen for your names. Reggie. Timmy, Felix, Zane, Annabelle. Annabelle's not here. Ava, Clara, Kate, Brandon, Hugo. I'm not pausing. I'm pausing because I hear noise. You should shh, so everybody can hear. Hugo, Karen is not attendance. Pay attention. And Kate Watt, I do not have your work from last day on the House MD pilot episode. It was actually going to be due last day. We expended it today. And it is intended to be quick, so please get that in ASAP. On forward. Today. From last day's work, however, what examples of consent were in that episode? Yeah.
Explicit?
Yeah, we'll give you an example.
Well, she like the doctors didn't hear her out because she literally said, no, I don't want it. I prefer that.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And they respected that. I was like, yeah, okay. We tried to convince you otherwise, but now we can't do it. Yes.
Wait.
Presume.
Of course you did.
What are they? Hands? Yeah.
Presume consent when they gave her like the tracheotomy and drugs and she went into anaphylactic shock.
Presumed when she went into anaphylactic shock. That's also an example of a type of consent we're going to do today. The type of emergency consent. Yes.
I thought that she didn't consent to any treatment, but like she was treated anyway. Was that not the case?
No, I don't think so. Like she wasn't held down by straps or anything. That she was there of her own accord trying to get better.
Also, she didn't consent to like having her house broken into.
She did not consent to having her house broken into, as Dr. House says. Everybody lies. He didn't want her consenting. He didn't want her to know. Yeah. Why do you think he did that?
Why I think they broke into her house.
No. Why? Yeah. Why do you think he did not tell her? Like he could have just said, "Hey, we need to investigate your house for toxins." He didn't.
That would have been lame.
I don't know why he wouldn't.
He had a phrase in there as to why he did that. You know, she could be running a.
Oh yeah, she could be running that.
Which was just an offhand for like, she could be doing all sorts of stuff that's illegal. We don't care. We just want to know. Yes.
I don't know if it was specific like type, but they did ask for like allergies that she might have for the MRI. Like they didn't do a background.
Yeah. They didn't show that. It's probably implied in a normal setting they would ask that. But in any setting too, you may not know that you have an allergy, and certainly an MRI is unusual. But also, they didn't show that they asked it. Maybe they were really sloppy. Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe it's just me, but I don't remember them asking for consent. Like when she first got to the hospital to be treated, they just kind of treated her because she showed up and like she looked like she
was
needed help.
unconscious.
Oh, yeah, when she first showed up, she would have been unconscious. And there's a couple of lines of dialogue at the very beginning. This is like some weeks later. So she's been transferred from her home doctor in her little town to this major metropolitan one.
So what
Because,
has been implied because like she's
Yeah.
there and unconscious and has a problem. So
yeah,
they-
and so they're treating her. She's not objecting. But you're right. There was no family around that was acting on her behalf that we ever saw. Most of the time, though, she seemed lucid. Her cognitive decline happened in spurts. So they're probably, I would assume they'd be asking her, because she's not tied down, she's not a prisoner, she's not running away. But there's a lot of implied consent there that they seem to show. Was it there again? And text consent? What kind of relationship does Dr. House have with his patient?
Bad one.
Hands.
Toxic.
Hands. I don't want examples. There.
It's a paternalistic relationship. So he's like kind of saying, you do this, you do this, you do this.
Yeah.
He's not really offering her great options. He's just like saying, my word is my word. And,
I'm in charge. I know what's best. Here's what we're gonna do. Yeah. Yes?
It's like unprofessional when he's talking about the affair with that one.
Yeah. He didn't break it very gently. He was just like, your wife's having an affair. Here's the reasons. Bye. And
How did he bother?
he made the assumption that because the person was orange and his wife didn't notice, she must not care. And then made the jump from there to having an affair, which I would think would be a fairly big leap. Yes?
He doesn't really care about, like, I guess, their feelings. He's kind of just like, look, you're a bad mother and your son's gonna die unless we help you. So, you know, it's up to you.
He seems a lot like a facts don't care about your feelings, bro. Yeah. And then,
He's like very frank and he's like brutally honest with his patients. He just kind of says what's on his mind. And then the comments he was making about his one employee at the end.
oh, yeah. That was awful. Now, brutally honest. Is brutally honest bad?
In some cases.
That might be a better way to present the information. Oh, yeah.
He doesn't like take their feelings. Like he doesn't care about their feelings. Like there's one guy who's having pain, and instead of like actually listening to him, he just gave him candy, and then he took his medicine.
Yeah. And does that gentleman know that he's eating candy?
No.
No. He thinks. However,
That
he
could be a
did.
placebo.
He did seem to cure him.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was more empathetic to children, I think.
Mm. They seemed to have some humanity at that point. Just so that you're aware, this show made everything come around full circle because it's actually a Sherlock Holmes show. The writers based it on Sherlock Holmes. It's supposed to be Sherlock Holmes, which is, I find interesting because Arthur Conan Doyle, when he invented Sherlock Holmes as a detective, he was inspired by his doctor. Because he would walk into his doctor's office and the doctor would say, oh, I see this, and you've got that in your shoes. You've been exposed to this. Here's what's wrong with you, and would fix things. And after a while of observing the doctor, he was like, this is amazing. Doctors are so good at gathering clues. He invented Sherlock Holmes. And of course, what's the show called?
Dr. House.
House. Holmes. How they did that deliberately, supposed to be a planet. So now we have a doctor based on Sherlock Holmes, who was originally based on a doctor.
That's the show.
Would you want to be treated by Dr. House?
If I was really sick.
Hand. Yes?
They mentioned that he's like the best doctor so if it was if I was in that hospital specifically, I'd say probably just because it's you kind of have to take the insults, but at least you're not gonna die.
There is a lot of value in skill. Yes.
It kind of seemed because they were doing experimental treatments on her for a little bit. So if I happens to be the patient that he actually cares about keeping alive, yes. But if I was in the group of patients where he does some experiments on me and I die, but it's for his gathering of knowledge, so it's okay, then no.
It's interesting because there is that he just wants to know. He might not care.
He doesn't care if you die, just
Yeah.
like to know if it would work or not.
Is there any point in the show where it shows he does care about his patient?
Yes.
When?
Near the end, he like starts to show more empathy towards her.
He actually does what she says. I'm gonna go there and there.
I would not, because he seems like very random, and I would prefer like someone more predictable.
You'd like someone who knows what they're doing, but maybe you'd accept someone less who is also able to communicate.
He ran like so many tests without like full proof that by the end the girl just wanted to die.
Yeah, there was a lot of implied consent. It was like, we're just running a test. She, like, when she asked, like, I don't have cancer anymore, clearly, she didn't know why she was stopping that treatment. She didn't communicate nothing to the patient.
Did they give her steroids a lot of time?
Yeah, this is try steroids, because we think it's this. And that is a lot of medicine, but as Dr. Cuddy ran in and said, like, you have no actual evidence that it's this. And then it turned out to be a bad idea. They've done, what was it? I can't remember the group. Some major, really competent, like say Team 6 type of group. And they graph the apparent, you've got competent. So how good are you there? And the further you are on that line, the more competent you are in your job. And then they have communication. How long do you get along with everybody? How well do they communicate to you? Do you just blow up for no reason? Like, how's your communication? And of course, everybody, if you divide this up, everybody wants people in this range. Really competent, highly communicative. What they have found, though, when they look at all these teams, the teams that are really effective, they'll if you're highly competent, but you can't communicate, teams that have people who are here, they're reasonably competent, but they have good communication are often far more valuable in teams. And when you're working in a team, being able to communicate turns out you can make better teamwork, and they are more valued. The really competent person who can't communicate isn't often as valued, because if you can't understand what they're doing and you don't know why, you don't feel you understand what's going on, you might even make bad mistakes, as the patient did at the end. Goal for this week. You're going to get another chunk of knowledge today, so it's going to be a nice day. But on Friday, we're going to watch another show. I'm going to try and have like some sort of show or something once a week, so that we can practice things. Now we've got a substantial amount of knowledge here. Any last comments or questions on it? Zoe? Oh, you might like that. No? Okay. So notes out, standards for informed consent. I think we left off here. No doctor speech must be given in a language the patient can understand. Being told isn't the same as understanding. Did we already do this one? Oh no, we were getting up to exceptions. This means if someone has you sign a form in a medical context, but you speak Spanish and no English, and you're at an English hospital in Canada and you've had a medical emergency, hospitals have translators waiting. They subscribe to a service nowadays. And before they could subscribe to a service, they would try and get local people so that when something happened, they could, as reasonably as possible, get someone in there in order to let them know in ways that they could understand what was going on. It's particularly difficult for children, which is why you're considered incompetent, and we ask your parents instead up until a certain age. But once you're this age, we start asking you. Now, exceptions. When don't you have to ask for informed consent? And that was in that show, too. Someone mentioned, I think you would even mentioned it, yep.
Like, if they're about to die.
Yeah. When she collapsed to the floor and she couldn't speak. Now, actually, I lie. She did have a little bit of informed consent. What did she write on the board?
Call the nurse.
Call the nurse. So clearly she wanted medical help, so you can move from there. But if she had written nothing and you found her on the floor, someone's in a car accident, and they're unconscious. So you can do that sort of presumed consent because it's an emergency. So the first exception is called the doctrine of emergency. If a person is incapable of giving consent, unless there's reasons to assume otherwise, the doctor may do what is best if there's no proxy decision maker available. And that is time sensitive. If they're going to die in the next 5 minutes, clearly, and there's no proxy immediately standing there, you don't have anybody to ask. You're not going to wait around and go, well, let's call their mom and dad. And do they have a... Oh, look, they died. That would be bad. Shucks. can you think of another time that you may not want to give informed consent? Is there any other circumstance where you feel it would be justified? If you heard it, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense why I didn't tell. Yep. Pardon? Under drugs, they're not competent. So actually, then you have to find a proxy person, and you're probably working under the doctrine of emergency.
What's a proxy?
We haven't specifically done proxy. I've just been mentioned all the time. Proxy is someone who makes a decision on your behalf in your best interest.
It's like if you're the caretaker.
Yeah. Right now, it's your parents. And once your parents get older, it might be you. In the weird way that it goes around. I know a student of mine who took not my very first ever science and ethics course, but he recently wrote me to let me know that he is now the proxy decision maker for his parents. Both of them, it turns out, developed early onset dementia, and they actually come in and out of it. So a lot of the times they are perfectly fine, but there are times they're not. And he now has complete control over all of their finances. They have to ask him for a weekly allowance because what he doesn't want is for them to be called up by someone and then they transfer all their money because they're freaked out because their computer's not working and they're in an episode where they can't think properly. So he's their proxy decision maker. He makes all the decisions. They run through him. And of course, famously, there was a singer who recently got emancipated. You know who that was? Britney Spears. She had her dad, she had an episode when she was young and making a lot of money that suggested she wasn't making good decisions, and the court appointed her dad because she was so famous and had so much money, like she's going to just break herself. Someone needs to make decisions for her. It's a really odd case because we almost never do that unless the person involved is not going to recover. It's usually done for people who are very aged or very young, or in other ways, permanently incompetent. You get into a car accident, you damage your brain in such a way that you're never going to be competent again, and you need someone else to make decisions on your behalf. In Britney Spears' case, she was just really young and immature. Lots of people are when they're in their 20s. You're allowed to make bad decisions. And so it took a long time for her to get her rights back. And she has still done some things that seem questionable, but that's her stuff. Also, this only applies for unforeseen emergencies. If you can predict the emergency, then you have a duty to ask. You can't just like, oh no, this entirely foreseeable thing happened, and now I can't contact anybody. You would meet with the patient, you'd say, look, you're at risk for a heart attack, we have to do the surgery. Here's all the things that could happen on the operating table. We would like to get your consent for the different types of procedures we may have to do. Do you want to go on life support? What type? How long would you consent to having the plug pulled under these conditions? Talk to your family. Who is your proxy decision maker? Are they going to be here? Do you have a phone number? And you're going to do all of those ahead of time. Grab that one. But is there any other case we still haven't found one in which you wouldn't want to tell someone? What might be the danger of information?
Like if someone's overdosing on like an illegal substance, you might not want to, call the authorities for that.
Oh,
Out of fear of getting in trouble.
doctors have a duty to protect the patient. So if you're overdosing, they're not necessarily going to call the police. Now, if it looks like you were involved in a crime and you just robbed a bank, they might call and say, is this the guy? But they're still going to treat you. And if you just took drugs, you can tell your doctor that. They're not going to run to the police and say, arrest this person, they do drugs. From their perspective, it's a health problem. You're not harming anybody else, you're just harming yourself. So they'd like you to stop, but they're still going to treat you. And they're certainly still going to tell you what's happening. What might a doctor worry about if they told them information? Yeah.
They might not want to do it.
They might not want to do it. Now, the next one is often abused in those cases. They'll say, oh, if I told them, they would make the correct choice. That actually isn't a reason why you're not allowed to. It's close, though. There could be reasons why you wouldn't want to tell someone something. What do doctors have to not do? It's an oath. Got hippos in this. Pardon?
Harm their patients.
You're not allowed to harm your patients. Are there any foreseeable circumstances in which you could tell someone something and it would harm your patient? Yeah.
You tell them that they're gonna die in 9 months, and it could be like very mentally stressing or something.
Could be mentally stressing. And if they are already, say, clinically depressed, you're worried about, say, suicide earlier, in some way they're going to harm themselves, that might give you a reason not to tell them.
So they wouldn't be allowed to tell you?
They would claim it as what's called therapeutic privilege. And the same way we have the doctrine of emergency, we have the doctrine of therapy. They would then not tell you and say, well, the reason why is that we were afraid it would cause you a heart attack.
But what about like family and stuff?
They might still tell your family.
Oh.
Yeah. So they may not tell. So I do know a case in which this happened. They didn't tell their patient, I think, for a few weeks. This particular patient was in old age home, and many of their friends within the last 6 months had all died of cancer. And they knew if they told them that they had cancer, they would refuse treatment. And not just that they would refuse treatment, they would probably harm themselves as well. Because after all of that, they were in a mental state where they probably wouldn't be able to hear anything, and they were decently worried that they would cause some sort of immediate harm to them. They told everybody else, and then when the time was right, they actually did tell them. But and the person during that time also wasn't getting treatment. The doctor was like, well, I won't tell them because I'm worried about harm. But the type of cancer they have isn't vasculitis, and this we actually have time to work with this. But they deliberately withheld it. It's fairly rare to be done well. It's far more likely for a doctor to do it wrongly, which they say, well, I'm not going to tell them because I'm afraid they're going to make the bad decision. The person was otherwise mentally well, but I don't like the idea of cancer treatment. I'm going to say no. Well, they are allowed to say no, even if you believe it to be bad. You have to have some sort of immediate risk. So, can withhold information if and only if giving that information at that time would harm the patient. Doctrine of therapeutic privilege. Now this, I think it's fairly understandable. This goes right back to the case in which they were in an accident and the doctor gave them a blood transfusion. If you find someone they require a blood transfusion, you're allowed to give it. That person had a card in their wallet that said they were Jehovah's Witness, they do not consent to transfusions. So that person actually was capable of giving consent. They had pre-thought of that condition and made sure that everybody would know not to do that, and that's how we got that defined under Canadian law, because the courts have held, yeah, they did competently refuse consent, even if they were unconscious. But if you find someone, there's no reason to do that. How many of you taking first aid? Excellent. Chest compressions? You've learned chest compressions? Have they told you what to do? You know, patient's there, you rip open, you're about to start chest compression, it says DNR. There's a tattoo across their chest. That means do not resuscitate. Are you allowed to not give them chest compression?
Yes.
What's it? Well, we've had opposite now views.
You're obliged to not give them chest compression.
All right. They have a tattoo across. Is that the current teaching? Is that what you like? Is that what you learned in first aid, or is that a guess at this point?
That's what they're
Isn't
taught.
it like if you?
You should, but you don't have to.
You
No,
shouldn't.
if you have like first aid training, it's like your duty to.
If you have first aid training, it's your duty to give chest compression. And the problem with DNR tattooed on the chest, I know nurses that are currently in their, how old is she now? 52 or so. And she had DNR tattooed on her chest because She's seen people who have come back. It's not like the TV shows where they pop back right away and it's an easy recovery and there's no brain damage and you're just good. She's seen what happens and she knew the odds for herself and she was like, I never want that. If I go down, I'm not breathing, my heart's not beating, don't do chest compressions. She had it tattooed on her chest. And nowadays the current teaching is to ignore it. You give chest compressions anyway. Yes?
What happens to, why would you not?
In a TV show, once they do that and your heart stops pumping, the person recovers. And they may be a little groggy, but they're fine. In real life, your brain has gone some minutes without oxygen. It's very likely for them to have been brain damage, in some cases extensive brain damage. Now, if you are young, as you are, you're far more likely to have a better outcome. But if like you're in, you respond to an accident in the Malahat and you've got a 55-year-old male who's had a poor diet his entire life, he's been working on his heart attack that he had before he crashed the car. He's not coming back well, even if you manage to get there right away. And so having seen that, she just didn't want that for herself. So at some point in her mid-30s, she got that tattoo. However, nowadays we are told to ignore it. Why would you ignore a tattoo, but you'd accept, we still accept cards and wallets. If you have DNR and a card in your wallet, that is allowed not to. There, and there.
Because sometimes people tattoo weird stuff on themselves.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe. That isn't the reason that I was expecting, but yeah.
Listen to what people tattoo on themselves.
Yeah,
They like really
maybe
bad
it's a
stuff.
decoration. They're fairly, the ones they used to give are fairly standardized. Yep.
Also, tattoos are permanent. Maybe you, like, when you tattooed it, you didn't want it, and then after, like, 20 years or something.
Maybe you changed your mind. People change their mind all the time. And a tattoo is fairly permanent and it's very expensive to get it undone. I mean, I know nowadays you can't erase them, but that's not even that good. Same comment or a different comment?
No, I was gonna say because you need to take immediate action, and if they're not capable of giving like their consent like verbally, then
Yeah, you're supposed to do it. But if you find, you're reading off of something. Pardon? Oh, just that. If you find a card in their wallet that says "Do not resuscitate," that actually is a legitimate way to say "Don't resuscitate," because the card could be taken out at any time, and you can change your mind.
is it okay? So it's like it's tattoo like not professional, not like.
Oh, any tattoo now, they just say ignore them because they're so permanent that they may have changed their mind and you have no way of knowing that. And they would hate to not resuscitate someone who changed their mind more than they would want to obey the instruction.
How would you see like the cause to not resuscitate?
First thing you're going to do if you've been trained in first aid is pull out their wallet and look for any medical information. Look for a chain. So you can get a DNR thing on a chain, just like you can get a medical bracelet. There's other ways that you can signal it that are temporary that you can remove it at any time. And so oftentimes professional responders will be doing things like looking through your wallet, like what's the number of your next of kin? Because who knows what happened? Maybe they'll know something to tell us why you're unconscious. Because if you're in diabetic shock, that's a very different treatment than if you just hit your head and fell down. Yeah. So often they're just looking for information. For both of these, you should know. Now, all of that, if you do have first aid, there's a lot of Good Samaritan laws. Is that how you spell Samaritan? If you're trying to save someone's life and you're doing your best, and you've had some first aid training, and you make a very critical mistake and you're responsible for their injury, there's a number of Good Samaritan laws that are protecting you. Someone's in a car accident, you come up, they're lying on the ground, you drag them out of the car, and it turns out they had a broken neck, and when you drag them, you finish the job essentially, and you turn them into a paraplegic. You should never move someone if there's an immediate danger. However, you didn't know that, you were panicked, you were just trying to determine if they were breathing, you're protected in
Is it
Canada.
like the
In many
principle of
countries.
possibility?
Pardon?
Is it like the principle of possibility? Because
Yeah, I would say if you were defending it ethically, you would say that it's impossible to expect novices what to do, and we'd rather have a society. People are trained to help. That's going to save the most lives. Yeah.
What does that say?
Protect novice helpers. I was going to say amateur, and then I realized I often mix up which way the E and U go, so I didn't want to make a spelling mistake right in front of everybody. I was like, I know how to spell novice. Yes, that's how I pick my words. What can I spell? So you are protected even if you do the wrong thing. If someone has DNR in a wallet and you didn't see it and you resuscitate him, you're still protected under Good Samaritan laws. Most countries have these, but do check your country. There's a couple countries that don't. And so you do need to check for those. Doctrine of therapeutic privilege comes with a lot of caveats. Making the patient upset. If they're just going to get really mad, that's fine. They can get mad. It might be upsetting news. Fear that making the patient will make the wrong choice is not harm. So I'm going to tell them, and because they believe in crystals, they're going to refuse chemotherapy and get a bunch of crystals and make their own little crystal house and try and cure themselves that way. They're allowed to believe the things that they believe.
So when you're in lifeguard and someone is like panicking in the water and you need to save them, are you allowed to knock them out?
Yes. Hold it. I have to ask though, because I was trained. I'm not a qualified lifeguard. My thing expired and I wouldn't know what to do anymore. But I was trained like back when I was 14. I took it, and that was one of the things they trained us to do was how to knock someone out so they didn't drown you when you were trained. So they still teach that?
No, they don't.
Well, I'm asking.
I think so.
Yeah.
But isn't that like unconsented harm?
I think the argument there would be someone who is drowning is not competent. They are making, right? Like they're just panicking because they don't have air and they're in a state of panic. You're removing the panic and then it's the only way to rescue them.
What about when you punch them,
But don't
get a
punch
heart
them,
attack,
put them
like
on
they die?
Are you trained in lifeguard?
No, I'm not.
Oh, are you trained in lifeguard?
I am too.
Okay, so what are you supposed to do?
You're supposed to like put them on the wall.
You're supposed to put them underwater?
Yeah, in some cases. But also there's also some cases where
What? Yeah, sorry?
there's some cases like I don't know what it's called, but it's like there's like a restraint for specifically people who are drowning.
Oh,
And then you
okay.
can like wrap it around them, and then that's how you pick them up, and it secures their arms and stuff.
So it's
But,
like a straight box.
Yeah.
How do you get closer?
But like
You're going a little
it depends on the distance like
Yes, I was gonna
that
ask
you
how
are
you get
from the
close.
person, and also like I only got trained with like pool lifeguarding, not like at sea. So maybe if it's at sea, like they have to knock them out
Yeah,
or something.
like a
But like,
Big bath on your side.
yeah.
Yep.
In scuba diving, when someone's panicking in the water, you literally just go underwater, go behind them, and just like restrain them there.
And just pull them back. Yeah. What I was trained to do is how to kick them, and then how to kick them in the face if necessary, to try and get them to stop struggling. And then once they started drowning, then you rescued them with some sort of hold to pull
How do you
them to
kick them
safety.
if you're in the water with them though?
You're treading water. You have to learn how to tread water basically one leg and kick them. Because what a drowning person will do is they will grab onto anything to get up and breathe. And as soon as they grab on you, you go down. And then if you have to get up, they're the only thing to grab. And then they go down. I've watched that happen. Both of them are fine. This isn't a terrible story where everybody dies. But one of them was an extremely experienced swimmer who went to help the other person, and it was like a second, and they were in just as much danger because all of a sudden they just started doing this, and they were both drowning.
So when you were supposed to knock them out and you knock them out, they like get more in danger than they were before. Is it your fault?
If you're doing what you're trained to do, and that's been already approved, like this is how you save people. This is like if you performed an operation, a heart transplant, and during the heart transplant, something you weren't aware of in their heart, blew up. A valve opened up, the blood went everywhere, and they died as a result of the heart transplant. You're not to blame, because the heart transplant was still the best information at the time.
But what about when you're not trained? When you're not a lifeguard and you're just trying
If you're performing heart surgery and you're completely untrained,
like,
if you have no training in in saving people, you probably shouldn't try to help. The Good Samaritan laws, though, do kind of protect you, though, because they protect everybody. Because if there's a car accident, people with no first aid training will run in there and try to help, because it's fairly like someone screaming in distress. The number one, what was it? I told way back when we did the podcast on what is good. There's, I think I mentioned this. when you look at drowning victims, males between 40 and 60 just spike, like that particular age group. Because if they see someone's drowning, they just tend to jump in. And weirdly, a lot of them don't even know how to swim. They just do that, and we don't really know why. But if you don't know how to swim, please don't try and rescue anybody else. It is a weird situation. It seems like a very dad response. Now, I'm not going to read the instructions. I'm going to just try and help, even though I can't swim. I don't know. Does someone else have a hand in this? No? Okay. Must be a direct harm. They'll have a heart attack. I'm going to send them into a manic or depressive episode because of their mental health. There is some sort of direct response thing. It can't just be they're going to be very, very upset or sad or another emotion that would be fairly normal. So. Now, I think Dr. House may have done a fair amount of this without worrying about that. I'm not going to tell them because I know what's best, but that's not quite therapeutic privilege. That's just privilege. I'm a doctor and I know things. And you use the word paternalistic, which is going to come up next because that's going to be in a doctor-patient relationships that we're going to do. So, must be direct heart attack, suicide risk. They have a pre-existing mental status like manic depressive or schizophrenia that in that moment you think this would be very bad. Because people, even if they have mental health problems, they will have many times where they'd be perfectly fine. Mental illness is not a constant state. Sometimes it varies. I think one of the most interesting people on TikTok I follow is someone who is schizophrenic. And one of the things he does is when he's feeling an episode comes on, he does a TikTok live because the people on the TikTok while he's doing the live can tell him if the people he sees are really there or not. And this turns out with the advent of cell phones to be very common now, because if they're talking to someone, they're not there, and they hold up their phone, the phone won't show the image. So they can actually reference with their phone if the people are really there or not. I know a baker, she's a fantastic baker, she's also schizophrenic. And they had their opening, and while her husband in the back was baking, she was out meeting the customers, and after they were done, she found a bunch of cookies on the floor. She realized she was handing them to non-existent customers because her brain did that. Pardon? Paternalistic means acting like the traditional family model in which the father's in charge. They make the best decisions for everyone. They get to make all the decisions in a kind of benevolent way, the nuclear family method.
Also, schizophrenia, is that really rare?
I mean, yes and no. It's rare, but it's not so rare that you may go through your entire life not knowing if someone has it, but that's also because mental illness is a bit stigmatized in our society, so they may not tell you. They're on their meds, you may never know. But I know a couple of people with it. I know one of the risk factors we lecture now to your age group, especially now that marijuana is legalized, is please, even if it's legalized at 19, please wait until 21 or later for any amount of marijuana. Marijuana-induced psychosis is a real thing. You can give yourself schizophrenia. What it seems to be is if you were already predisposed to it, genetically or otherwise, and you have and you use a lot of marijuana, sometimes it will start it early and trigger it where maybe it might not have triggered it at all. We know now some more of that from twin studies where one twin has it, one twin does it. We know there's a genetic component, but we also know some people seem to not get it and some people do. There's definitely risk factors in your environment. When your brain is still developing and you expose it to drugs, it seems to be one of those, particularly marijuana. Yep.
Do they just walk around and see if they
That's one of the things you can have. And to put it more in context, have you ever been like really tired and you kind of saw something and then it wasn't really there? No. No one's ever been that tired. Yep.
Like when I was like when you're I've seen the movies and video games, but during the desert, you're like thirsty all the time and you start to see an oasis.
I wouldn't totally go by movies. They like to exaggerate a lot of things.
But that actually happens because of like science.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
a reflection of like, the sky on the.
Oh, were you talking about mirages?
Yeah.
Oh, that everybody sees those. You can see those if you drive in your car.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
a reflection of the sky.
Yeah, you're actually seeing the blue sky. When the light comes down, light the air can bend light in the same way glass can bend light. And then when it's at different temperatures, it bends light differently. So light that's coming at the road this way gets really hot air above the road and then goes like this. So it never hits the road. So it's light from the sky going like this and hitting your eyes, and then you're just seeing blue sky on the road. And it looks like water, because what else would something blue on the road be? Look shimmery. Okay, I think we got a few examples. We're going to talk about the BC Infant Act at one point. But we have allowed people to make some fairly extreme decisions, even at a young age. 10-year-old Katie Dacre, I think she was the youngest one I found. Question? She was taken to court, obviously because her daughter died. But the court didn't actually do anything about it. They said, no, this makes complete sense. They took Katie to see a doctor. Brian Henshaw gave her two choices. One, admit her to the hospital for extreme life-saving measures, or let this syndrome run its course. Katie let them know how she felt. Rett syndrome means you can't communicate very well. So they just felt that she was in so much pain that they were going to allow her to die. And the court was like, that makes sense. And she was only 10. We have a number of cases now in Canada, because Canada, quite recently, legalistically, has allowed euthanasia. Oh. No, that content, they're now blocking me of that one, so I can't use that one. So I will use this one, and that one, and that one. And we will. It wasn't that long ago, 2014, where Canada did not. Now, just to be clear, what is euthanasia? Yes?
It's like when you're killed by hospitals, and it's like your choice.
Yeah, your choice. I think you said hospitals, because someone said
Assisted suicide.
a professional, and that could be like an assassin. But yeah, it's your choice, but you need help. So you don't want to do it on your own. You want it in the same way you want medicine. It kept coming up in Canada over and over again in terms of its laws. It comes up in ethics all the time. If you have the right to life, not the duty to life, then wouldn't you necessarily have the right not to keep going if you do not? Yes.
And is it just you, or can also your family give consent if you're unconscious?
This is one of those tricky things. So in Canada's euthanasia laws, there are a lot of safeguards to ensure that it's not something that people sign you up for against your will. So they don't want little old grandma with a lot of money to have her family, oh, let's kick her off and then we'll take the will. And we're all much richer. So the law is written with that worry in mind. So you can't necessarily be done that way. However, there have been cases where the person can't communicate, but people are applying, saying, look, this is how much pain they're in, and we are acting as a proxy, and there is a path to do it. Yeah. I'm not an expert, I don't know the path, but I know a path exists. So way back in 2014, we were talking once again about whether or not we were going to legalize euthanasia. Very few countries in the world have it legalized, and we have previously come down. Hold it. That's not the heading I was looking for. This National Post article substituted a different thing. What's in this one? The Sue Rodriguez case. Sue Rodriguez case is in British Columbia. This was one of the first cases in which we said, and at the time I remember reading in the paper, it was so long ago we had papers, that Canada would never, and these are all the reasons why, we would never allow euthanasia. Her case was reasonably sad. What she was, is she said, suicide is not technically illegal, and I right now have the capability of helping my own suicide. But I have a medical condition that is slowly going to make me worse and worse and worse. And at some point, the pain is going to be at the point where I do not want to live anymore. But at that point, I won't have a choice because I won't be able to help myself. So either I do it now when I can, or you allow me, or you allow me to request a doctor to help me later so I can live the fullest life I can. Because why are you essentially discriminating against me based on a disability? Later, I will be disabled and not able to take the same actions that I would be if I was able. So she approached it as a disability issue. The court decided 5-4. My ethics professor in discussing this was like, the papers keep saying the Supreme Court's never going to change their mind, but they're going to change their mind because 5-4 means they're just one vote away. And you people, as in citizens of Canada, keep bringing this up because you see your family members who are hurting and you want reasons to be able to allow this. It seems to be allowable under deontology, and certainly utilitarianism wouldn't care about keeping someone alive who doesn't want to live necessarily. We do worry about people who mental health status means they're making bad choices, so they're incompetent, but we exclude those. Canada just this year was going to allow people who are mentally incompetent to also select euthanasia under very strict provisions, because why are we discriminating against people who have mental health issues? That has not gone, it was very close, it was going to pass this March, and then they pulled back again to think about it some more, but that's going to be coming up.
Why doesn't Canada have the death penalty?
Now, in terms of, this is not a voting thing. If you poll Canadians, on average, most of them would, more than 50% would prefer the death penalty for some crimes. It's based on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is considered unethical. It's unethical because you cannot, it is difficult to say that the people that you are executing, that there was no possibility of a mistake made. To use the terminology, beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean beyond all doubt.
So it's like in the odd case of the guy's actually innocent?
And it's not the odd case. Since we've discovered, say, DNA typing, we've found a ton of old cases that turned out perfectly legitimately, based on the evidence, they convicted people who did not commit the crime. And some of those were horrendous crimes. Now, there are issues. There's to put it in there's a gentleman right now who is on probation in Campbell River, so just up island. He is a known serial rapist, and they have said he is going to do it again, guaranteed. And he's released in the community. And people in the community are like, why don't we have the death penalty for people like this? We know they're going to commit again. We know that this is a known danger. Why is he being, but he met his legal requirements for what he did in terms of punishment.
But they know he's going to do it again.
The psychologist is like, based on what, in terms of treating him, I do not think that he has seen the error of his ways. So the community is very worried.
So
Now, and those are the cases that are brought up with why, like, we know he's guilty,
yeah, it's like,
we know.
obviously the person.
obviously. But where does the death penalty tend to fall? It tends to fall not just on those people, but on people we really thought was guilty and then turned out not to.
So how about they like made exceptions only for people that have been like caught red-handed?
It was the one-armed man. There's a number of cases where I've done this before, and I'll get your question next, so you don't keep your hand up. Haven't I done the scenario where I have killed Mrs. Hanley? Okay, Mrs. Hanley has been brutally murdered right in our entrance. So you're walking up between Privet and Whittle, you turn to the right, Mrs. Hanley is lying on the floor. I saw Mrs. Hanley there, obviously. I am devastated. I run inside, I lift her up. I am not thinking in my right mind, so instead of doing the medically, proper thing and leaving the knife in, trying to help like everybody does, I take it out. And then the police arrive. And I am over Mrs. Hanley's body with a knife in my hand, the murder weapon. And students then testify at my trial that the night before they heard me saying, "You do that again, I'm going to kill you." I get so convicted. It turns out we were just playing a video game. And I said, "If you do that again, I'm going to kill you because, you were going to die on the video game." But you didn't know that. Sounds really bad in context, and I would definitely be convicted based on that evidence. So there are people you can catch red-handed who didn't do it. And so having the death penalty is a very final punishment. We can't go back. Whereas even if someone's been in prison for 30 years, you can still release them. And on a utilitarian scale, in order to put in all the safeguards that like the US has in those states, the amount of appeals process, it's actually cheaper to put them in jail longer than it is to do the death penalty. So, there.
Isn't there like 15% of the people on death row in America were they not 100% sure that they?
Well, it's hard to be 100% sure, beyond a reasonable doubt. The statistics, I don't know the percentage, but I do know that when we have gone back to old cases, when we have new types of investigations, like DNA was a big boon for this, because that didn't exist. And then we had old blood samples, and we could actually go and check. The person who was matched based on blood type, do they match based on DNA? And they found out, oh no, they didn't. The killer's blood literally doesn't match them where before we did. And it turned out that happened in a very high amount of cases. And then when you think of things like systemic bias, racism, and all those other biases that go into making a decision, it would make sense that people are making systematic mistakes in that way. So death penalty seems a bit final. So Canada, as a legal system, has been resistant to it. The Canadian population has been fine. They're like, it varies, but it's usually over 50% who's like, yeah, kill the child molesters, because nobody wants that. But on the other hand, if you're accused and you didn't commit the crime, and then there was a death penalty, we couldn't let you out. Yes.
If you.
Oh, you were next.
What is the max sentence you can get?
Oh, in Canada, in like 25 years. That's like.
You can get it like
For example, the gentleman who I mentioned in Campbell River, he's on probation, so he's actually been let out early, but they did that on purpose. Why would they not have him just serve the max sentence? Why would they let him out early?
As a social experiment.
This is social. I don't think I've heard. No.
Wait, he's on Campbell River.
Yep, he is in Campbell River.
Oh, so it doesn't rape anyone in jail?
Pardon?
So it doesn't rape anyone in jail?
No. No, they would just put him in solitary confinement if they were worried about that.
maybe if they catch him again, they can put him in for like more, like 25 years.
There's a penalty if you're out early. So if you're out early, you have to meet with your probation officer. You have to live under certain conditions. You have to announce your presence when you go to a town. The only reason that people at Campbell River know is because he has to tell them. That's a requirement. But if you serve your full time, you're a free person afterwards. You've done your time. He doesn't have to tell anybody nothing. So it's actually to our benefit to let those people. Also, the knowledge in the Canadian system is that most people have made a mistake. It is far cheaper, ethically better if we get them reintegrated into society as opposed to keep punishing them over and over again. And most very punitive methods of prisons tend to increase the rate that people recommit the crime. And so it depends on whether you think prison is for punishment or rehabilitation. And all of it has aspects of both, but Canada tends to lean a bit more towards rehabilitation, whereas other models lean to more punishment. Yep.
In this Hanley case, actually got taken to court, so they're actually going to be in jail for that.
Yeah, people are convicted on circumstantial evidence. I had the murder weapon in my hands.
Yeah.
I have testimony from other students about something I said that was very damning. There is no evidence that anybody else was in the house. The police looked, but once they saw me leaning over the body, they're gonna look very hard for anybody else. If a spouse dies, particularly a female spouse, but it actually goes for all spouses, statistically, who's the person who's most likely to have killed them?
The spouse.
Yeah, the other spouse. If there's a murder and a spouse dies, you look at the other spouse really hard. Because statistically, that's the person who's most likely to have murdered them.
And that is knowing that you might be just trying to rescue her.
Yes, because that's what I say at my trial. But then I've got a whole jury and judge who have to believe me. And I'm terrible at public speaking in front of adults. It's awful. We look at you weird. And then maybe I wish I saved this for you guys. There was this classic thing where someone was found not guilty, and then the news reports are like, I can't believe it. They didn't even look remorseful. What's the problem with saying they didn't look remorseful? Yes.
If they didn't do it.
If they didn't do it, of course they wouldn't be remorseful. Yeah.
Also, if you have a like really expensive lawyer or something, or like if you don't have
The amount of defense you can afford makes a huge difference in whether or not you're going to do that. Okay, I'm going to waste too much time. I said we have to do lots of notes today. Also notice there's a lot of computers out, which to me implies not a lot of note taking. Notes, computers away, notes. Robert Latimer. I always remember this one because I thought someone was going to punch me when I said something about this. If you're ever talking to someone and they're arguing and they're loud and they're really red in the face, you're probably pretty safe. But if they go completely white, stop talking and back away. Why? Yes?
Are they gonna like kill you?
Maybe, but why? Yeah.
It means that they're thinking of doing something.
Oh, they're more than thinking. There may not even be thinking. What is going white in the? Where did the blood go? To your arms and muscles. So you have just triggered fight. Whatever happened triggered fight or flight. They are in like you encounter a bear and you need to run away. Your body goes white, all the blood goes to your muscles, and now you can fight the bear, run away. You've triggered fight or flight. You see someone go completely white in the middle of an argument, they have triggered fight or flight. If they may not be thinking clearly, and if they punch, it's going to be with a lot of force. The argument has probably gone a little too far. Calm everybody down, back away, make soothing sounds. Robert Latimer. I don't have everybody. And a couple of notes on Sue Rodriguez and a couple of notes here would be very valuable. You might need to reference, you'll probably want to reference this later. So just write down the case, R.B. Latimer, Section 10 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms concerning cruel and unusual punishment. You don't need a lot of notes on it. If you just know what it is so that you can go back and look it up, would be great. What happened is when their child was born, during childbirth, she got rather severe cerebral palsy, severe intellectual and physical disabilities, and violent seizures. Little to no control of her muscles. The care given by her family was excellent. It's not like they didn't care about her. She was in constant pain. Undisputed, even the Supreme Court recognized she was in constant pain. What happened, and she's in constant pain. She can't take painkillers because she had a reaction to painkillers that gave her seizures. So now they can't even give her any treatment for the pain. So the Latimer said, no feeding tube. We're going to let nature take its course because her life is unlivable. We think this is the best thing. This is often brought up in cases of euthanasia because should she be allowed? But what Robert Latimer did is he took her. They eventually figured out. We found her dead while under the care of her father, while the rest of the family was at church. So the rest of the family left, and he put her in the truck, and he put the exhaust into the truck to ensure that she died. And he said this is motivated to help her. This is that he was trying to give her euthanasia for all the reasons we just said: constant pain, low quality of life, This is what she would have wanted. Difficult. She can't communicate very well. He was not only charged, but he was sentenced. Does it give the length of the sentence in here? Because it was amazing.
Life imprisonment.
Yeah. He got the serial rapist I mentioned, Campbell River. He got a more severe punishment than that person did. He's not even someone who, I mean, he doesn't have that many children. None of the other ones have cerebral palsy. Like, he's not going to do this again. There's no worry that he's going to reoffend. This was solely done in terms of the amount of punishment because the Canadian courts wanted to send a clear message. You can't kill your own children for any reason. Euthanasia is not legal in Canada. You can't get a doctor to do it. You can't do it. And I was, pardon?
This was his daughter?
This was his daughter. So
her daughter got injured while giving birth, right? That was what happened.
his daughter,
Yeah.
while his wife was giving birth, low oxygen supply, and ended up with a cerebral palsy, mental illness, and a bunch of physical disabilities. He gave the defense of necessity, like we had to do this for her because of her quality of life. And when it went back in 2001, they said that lengthy prison sentence, perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Now, this is 2001, did they say? 2024, euthanasia is legal. She would qualify today if they wanted to bring her there. It's interesting having children qualify. He served here in Victoria. I know someone who worked there. The stories are amazing. He, by all accounts, model prisoner. And he did not have any remorse. So this is one of those classic because he said it was the right thing to do. So he's consistent in his ethical outlook that what he did was right. And so obviously the board is going to say, well, you don't get parole then because you haven't agreed that it was wrong. They ignored the low risk of reoffending. I think I heard that he was out. He was later relocated to Victoria where he lived in a halfway house. So yeah, and he's been seeking out. Latimer's a famous case because there's no disagreement that Mr. Latimer loved his daughter, that he thought it was the right thing to do, that this was a case in which the person's quality of life was very low for a variety of reasons. Obviously, we don't want people just killing other people, even if they think it's right. But also the idea that nobody can, not even a doctor, there's no path, this is what I think really gave rise to the euthanasia movement in Canada after this, because people were upset. And some of the people I said, I almost got punched over this. I mentioned to someone, a colleague who I knew, I discussed this in Science and Ethics as a case. And I mentioned, like, there might have been good ethical reasons why he might have done that, because we're discussing on either side why he might have done it and reasons why he shouldn't have done it. And they were immediately so upset. Part of their role outside of the school was also they're disability rights activists. They're worried if disabled people's rights are not considered as important to others, it eventually becomes, well, you're a drain on society, why not kill yourself? Here's the Euthanasia Act. And we already put a lot of pressure on disabled people to solve their own problems without helping them. Latimer, we did. Rodriguez, I'm not going to mention because I think I did too much on Latimer. We'll talk about medical assistance in dying next day. So, we are going to get, I'm going to want you, in the last 2 minutes, I'm going to make you work. I will discuss this next day, but we're also going to take another heavy topic on. And then I'm going to give you some time on Wednesday to discuss both euthanasia and abortion. But we don't have time for discussion, so we have a minute and a half for some notes. I will post Judith Jarvis Thompson's original papers. These are the papers that everybody refers to when we're talking about that. Will often come up. You'll hear these examples given over and over and over again. Who was Judith Jarvis Thompson? This is not about personhood. This grants. You'll hear a lot of rhetoric talk about, is the fetus a human? And that's, obviously it's human. It's not a goat. It has to be human at every single point. Sperm and egg are human. Recently, interestingly, fertilized eggs have now been in some states granted personhood, and they're not allowed to get rid of them, which is now creating a huge ethical problem. Companies that help with implantation for people that can't otherwise become pregnant are now pulling out of those states because you can't. That implies that every single egg that has ever been fertilized on a petri dish must be given to someone and carried to term. There's no legal way to get rid of it. But this particular defense does not require that the fetus not be a person. I'm going to give you her two most famous examples because they're famous examples, so you should be familiar with it. It's probably the most repented essay in all of philosophy. There's a lot of critiques, and the first famous one is The Violinist. Point form as much as you can in the next minute, and I'll put it back up next day. Yep, point form. Go, 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 go. Stop sitting on your back. What are you doing?
I'm trying to get.
Go, go, go. Shouldn't be back out. You wake up in the morning, find yourself back to bed. You're going to have a show on Friday. Don't worry. The notes will stop. And you're attached physically with tubes to a famous violinist. They are using your circulatory system. They have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers basically knock you out because you have the right blood and tissue types, surgically attach you so that they have time to heal from their ailment. After a certain amount of time, they'll detach you. But if you detach yourself right now, that person will die. Right? I didn't say that. Yeah, I know. Yes, you have a question.
What is valid?
Ailment? Oh, like a disease or sickness. Okay. Good? Okay, now you can go.
This is a new phone?
Yep.
Is it like, will you suffer if or is it like you suffer just like?
If you have a kidney ailment, that person will die. Will die slowly and painfully.
No, but like you.
Oh, you?
Like if you don't, like you have any side effects?
Yes. It's going to be more difficult for you to move around. I'm sure. They're using blood. They're going to be able to run like a normal physical thing.
So you're like maybe half as good.
Yeah, and the detachment's going to have some surgery risk as well. The longer you go before the detach, a little bit higher the risk.
You don't know the bottom of this. Right? You don't know the bottom of this, no?
No. Although you're a member of the society.
Okay.
I told you it was cool. You like my app?
Is it Pocket Whip?
Yeah, it's Pocket Whip. So it's Pocket Whip.
What is the purpose of Pocket Whip?
Make a sound.
That's like almost like you just said beer
There's another one too. There's also this.
No, I- no, no.
No, that's it.